This work is part of a series of papers that we've been working on and projects we've been working on at Motu over recent years on the importance of infrastructure. And we wanted to look at the effects of infrastructure in determining long-term growth of cities and towns across New Zealand and which kinds of infrastructure might matter the most. And in the end, the results slightly surprised us. So we'll see that as we go. It's work with various of my co-authors. I'd like to start with an observation that was made a very long time ago by Confucius, that there is good government when those who are near are made happy and when those who are afar are attracted. And the idea of this is that a good measure of a success of a town or a city is whether they grow long term or whether they shrink or whether they stay the same. People will only move to a city if they think it's worthwhile for themselves and worthwhile not just in terms of their incomes but in terms of their overall well-being. So it's a good marker of success of whether people themselves think that a city or a town is attractive. And I want to take you through some history because I think it's very useful. As one of the first parts of this program that we did, we looked at the population of New Zealand towns and cities from 1926 through to 2006. We started this before the 2013 census figures were in. We're actually updating it at the moment. And to give you an idea, we had 56 towns and cities, actually from 1901 onwards, but we've got better data from 1926, so I'll take it from there. And we looked at the growth in these various towns over time in New Zealand. And what I've got on this slide are the 10 fastest growing towns in New Zealand and the 10 slowest growing towns in New Zealand over this 80-year period. And these, when I talk about a town or a city, I mean the whole urban area. I'm not talking about an administrative unit. So for this purpose, for instance, Auckland is characterised by the entire Auckland region. For Wellington, it's the urban area of Wellington, including Upper Hutt, Kapiti, Pororua, etc. The Hutt City, of course, in Wellington. So these are these sort of broad definitions of urban areas. And what we see is that some of these towns and cities have grown very fast since 1926, and so you see Tauranga growing at an annual average rate of about 4% per annum over an 80-year period. It's an extraordinary growth rate. And these other fast-growing sort of towns over here, and then a whole group of small ones, and of very slow-growing or negatively growing towns and cities down here. And you'll see a few similarities in the top 10 there. Almost all of them, other than Levin, I think, are in the northern half of the North Island, and Levin only is in that group because it grew fast in the pre-war period and immediate post-war period, and after that it stagnated to a large extent. So we see this quite extraordinary sort of northward growth of places, and similarly down here we see tending to be South Island towns or some southern North Island towns. So we see a very, very big difference in where people have actually wanted to move to over this 80-year period. And we can, before we look at the determinants of this, we can actually take it a little bit more in a fine-grained way. These were the largest cities back in 1926, and of course Wanganui was one of those. Back at that time, and before that it was the 5th largest city in New Zealand. And what we see is that some of these cities have hardly grown at all. Wanganui and Invercargill have not grown much at all. A few others have not really distinguished themselves in terms of population. Hamilton certainly has. It's been one of the fastest growing of the cities. Wellington, Christchurch keeping pace right through, and then this extraordinary thing here called Auckland. So completely different from the other major cities, other than perhaps Hamilton, which of course is only 100 and a bit kilometres away. If we start from, again, we can learn quite a lot from looking at very small towns. These towns were all between about 1,000 and 1,800 people back in 1926. Some of them have got smaller, Kaitangata, and where the other one is, Ohakuni, but some of them have got much larger, so Whakatane and Te Awa Motu. So again, these two places that are in the northern part of the North Island. People have actually wanted to move to these places. If we start next size of towns up, who started around about 2,000 population in 1926. Again, we see very markedly different growth. The one that's grown fastest clearly is Cambridge, again like Te Awa Motu and the others in the northern part of the North Island, and we see some other ones with decidedly poor growth over time. When we go to the next size up, these were towns sort of around 5,000 or so in 1926. You just see this remarkable standout here, Tauranga. Okay, so why is it that people have wanted to move to these extraordinarily fast-growing places and yet have not wanted to move to all these other towns that were the same size back in 1926? What is it that Tauranga's got going for it that these other ones don't? And the next size up, we see some similar sorts of things, etc. So we see this extraordinary diversity of town and city growth over time. You can find your favourite town and decide whether people have liked it or not liked it by voting with their feet. It comes back to this Confucius quote that people from afar will be attracted and people who are there will want to stay or not. So we've undertaken a couple of studies here to see how what are the determinants of why some of these cities have grown over this period of time and some haven't, and we divided our analysis up before and after 1966, so we have sort of two 40-year periods. You can get this research from either a Motu working paper or it's just been published in New Zealand Economic Papers, the academic journal as well, so you can it's free to download from the Motu website. We have four dominant factors affecting how these places have grown. And first of all, I should mention some of the factors that didn't actually affect it strongly. We started off with a very strong hypothesis that the transport links would have been of overriding importance, and it turns out that they weren't. I mean, we sort of thought about the experience of Gisborne and places that have got extremely poor transport services, but then there are some other places with not great transport services that have improved, increased in their population over time, where people have moved to, New Plymouth or Whakatane or places as well. I mean, none of them are quite as bad as Gisborne, but that seems to be an outlier. Overall, the amount of time it takes to get to places, whether it's by plane or by car or by train or whatever, hasn't been such a major factor. Maybe that's just because New Zealand's quite a small place, and so nowhere's that far from anywhere else. The four factors that have really had the biggest influence, not surprising in an agriculturally based country: local land use capability. If you're surrounded by good land, you've become more intensive, and that has helped your population. You've become a bigger agricultural service centre and that sort of thing. The second one, sunshine hours. This is found right throughout the Western world. It's the major determinant of growth of cities in the US. We've seen it in Australia. We see it in a number of European countries. That if you're in a place that's sunny, as people have got richer, they want more sunshine, and it's a very, very strong driver of population growth throughout the Western world, and there's not much, unfortunately, that we can do about it. Proximity to Auckland, as we saw in that first slide. Most of the fast-growing towns have been in the Upper North Island. Being close to Auckland has been of real importance. So this is the one area where perhaps infrastructure has been important. The fact is that it doesn't take long to get to the dominant city in New Zealand. You can perhaps set up your business there. You can locate there and still manage to get up and have a weekend in Auckland or something if you really want to. But again, for a city like Wellington, there's not much that we can do about that in the same way we can't do much about the first three. The fourth driver is, however, very interesting, and that's human capital of the cities. Cities that have had higher levels of human capital, higher skills, have attracted more people to come. They've attracted more businesses, and people have wanted to come to those. And again, we see this internationally. This is a very strong driver of population growth and employment growth and income growth in cities. And of course, for Wellington, we're especially strong in the last of these. Okay, it's a very highly skilled city. It's one with very important institutions that train more human capital, and so this is something that we can really make something of. And that takes me through to another study that we've just published as a Motu working paper, which took these results and the same sort of idea and looked at, okay, what effect have the size of universities and polytechnics in different cities had on the regional growth over time. And this is a more recent set of time using data from the 1980s onwards. And what we find there is that there's a very strong effect, it seems, of having a university in your town or your city and the size of that university on your overall city employment growth and population growth. So the universities have been a real plus factor for the cities that have them. By the same token, having a polytechnic does not seem to have any effect, or has a much lower effect. And what one of the interesting things we found is that with universities, if you train up skilled people, they tend to stay more likely to stay in that city but that's not the case with polytechnics. Polytechnics have no differentiation compared with other towns in terms of the types of people that live in them relative to similar sized towns where there's no polytechnic. So the university is really positive. And again, from a Wellingtonian's perspective, it shows the importance of universities for Wellington's growth. And here I mean Wellington as an urban area for the whole of the Wellington conurbation, if you like. Why might this be? Well, clearly there's a couple of different avenues that we know about here. One is that it just creates jobs, intellectual capital, skilled people create jobs. But also universities are often correlated with having high cultural amenities. And we know from the work of Richard Florida in the US and elsewhere that having these sort of bohemian type amenities, bohemian type people, a little bit on the edge, cutting edge, is very good for city growth and for incomes. People like being near a city where there's something happening. So that's important for Wellington. So just in future we want to take this work forward, looking at some more of these specific amenities like universities and polytechnics, perhaps hospitals, cultural facilities, etc., and seeing the importance of those for employment and income growth and overall well-being, life satisfaction. And it's interesting, when the local government conference that was just held in the last couple of weeks had a very strong theme about the development of second-tier towns and cities, and these sorts of amenities and what the importance of these amenities is going to be crucial for the growth of those towns and cities. So I'll leave it there and hand over to Ray.